What's up? So today I'm going to be reading my emails and trying to answer some questions that some of you have sent me. So now I'm going to catch up with my emails, and today we're talking about some interview questions that you guys have had for your BA jobs and you were not able to answer, you're struggling with. So the first question is from Murunal Pathak. I hope I'm pronouncing your name right. Apologies if I'm not. And it says, "Hi, Kara. An interviewer asked me the below mentioned questions and I was not able to give the answer properly. Could you please help me with that?" She says, hypothetical question. "A new feature is launched in the existing product, which will be used by the people from different regions all over the world. As a business analyst, when facilitating the UAT meeting, apart from testing, what other major parameters will you consider and discuss or walk through during the UAT meeting with the stakeholders, product owners, etc.?" Wow. Wow. That is a big question. Oh my goodness. I can see why you'd be a little bit nervous. Oh my goodness. I'm telling you, they're not playing with you in the BA interviews. They are not playing with you. You have got to get your act together for this interview. So let's read it again. A new feature is launched in the existing product. So we know the product already exists and you've just adding a new feature, right? Which will be used by the people from different regions all over the world. It's going to be a global product that everybody all over the world will be able to access. As a BA, when facilitating the UAT meeting, so you're now at the end of this build of this feature, the implementation is done, you're now testing it to make sure that it has user acceptance. So when you're facilitating the UAT meeting, apart from testing, and they put testing in quotation, testing, what other major parameters will you consider and discuss or walk through during the UAT meeting with the stakeholders or product owners, etc.? They give you a lot of information for you to be able to make your deduction. Firstly, they tell you it's an existing system. So the first thing you need to make sure in your UAT discussion is that it actually works how it used to work before. So you haven't broken anything that was working in the past, right? So in your UAT, you have to make sure you're testing it in the right environment, that the environment actually has data that would replicate the production environment. So one of the first things you're going to discuss or you're going to walk through with your stakeholders, your product owner, is if the UAT is set up. How is it set up? Do you have an environment that matches the production environment with the right amount of data, with the right access rights? Is that there? And if not, then you'd have to discuss with them how to get that so you can have the test. It's not just about conducting the test. It's setting up the environment to be able to replicate the production environment. That's the first thing you'd want to talk about with your stakeholders. And in this case, the stakeholders would have been your technical team, your lead, whoever is going to be responsible for setting it up, your DevOps person, whoever that person is. Now, once you have that set up, the way you're going to test will have to replicate the real world. They've told you that it is just a part of an existing system. So are there integration? It's a new feature, right? Is it integrated? Is data being passed from this new feature to the existing system? Is there a legacy component to it? Like, what are all the parts that play a role in the entirety of the system? So you're not just testing for what that small piece is, but you need to test it in the context of everything else that the system does. Okay, so you need to, when you're having a discussion about the UAT, you have to make sure that you have test cases that will allow the testers to be able to see how this new feature works alongside everything else that will be living with it in its own environment, because it's an existing system. The other thing that they would say, what parameters? The other major parameter they told you that this is a global, it has global users. So people are all over the world using it. So when you hear global, you always have to think time zones, right? How is the time zones going to affect how this feature works? Is there a component that is time sensitive? And does it affect people in different parts of the world? The other thing you have to think about when you think about people from all over the world using something is language. Is there a language component? Does it work well in English, but if you translate it into Spanish, it doesn't work? Or is there something like that that would need to be called out in your testing? The other thing that you need to look about is if it's being accessed all over the world, what is the performance issue? So it may have been great when you were implementing this feature and you were able to test it in your localized QA environment. But what happens in the real world when people from all over the world start hitting that server, start hitting it? Does it have lag time? Is there a performance issue? So those are some of the major things that you would need to discuss when you're about to do a UAT for a feature that's for an existing product that has global implications or global users. Those are the things that you need to think about. So yeah, this is one of those questions in an interview that could stump you. It could stump you. I can see how that can happen. But I have a video on UAT. You guys have to watch all my videos to be prepped for these interviews. I'm telling you, the interviewers are not playing with you guys. The interviewers are not playing, especially now that the BA role is now a 6-figure career in a lot of places. They want to make sure you know what you're doing, so they're not going to give you soft questions, right? So this is just a lesson. I hope in the next interview you'll be able to answer if you get this question again. And yeah, good luck. Thank you so much, Munro, for sending me that question. And I hope that it was able to help you and maybe others in how to answer questions like these. So I have another question, and this one is from Ankit, and he left this comment on my video about the secret to nailing your business analyst interview. And he writes, "Hi, I got a lot of confusion in answering questions to below frequently asked questions." So he says he have a lot of confusion in giving answers to some of these questions. And here's the questions he gets confused about. So what is the role of BA in Agile? So I've done a video on this. I have a whole playlist on the role of the business analyst in Agile, a whole playlist on the Agile business analyst. So the role of the business analyst in Agile is not very different from the role of the business analyst in Waterfall. Your role as a business analyst is to help translate between the business and the technical team and to provide accurate requirements documentation, whether it's in a requirements document or it's user stories. But your role, even in Agile, is to help to provide that documentation and to help to create synergy between the teams so that there's translation between the business and the technical team. In other words, you are the bridge. You help to clarify what they need to build. You are the one that's documenting the process. You are also helping the team understand clearly what they need to implement, right? Because you're writing it with the user stories and you're having conversations around it so that there's clear understanding. So in the Agile sense, you're not writing all of your requirements up front the way you do in Waterfall. You're writing it kind of just in time. So you're writing the user story just in time ahead of sprint planning, so you can have some time to talk about it with your team in the grooming sessions, refine it, and then get it in a definition of ready for it to be picked up, for it to be worked on. So your main role as a business analyst in an Agile environment is to create those user stories, to take the big picture and break it down into detailed requirements, which are then documented as user stories, to facilitate conversation between the teams so the team understands exactly what they need to build, to provide support for the technical team. So if they have any questions about what the acceptance criteria says, that you can support them on that. And to work with the team on the Scrum team, if you're doing Scrum, or if you're doing Kanban, you're working with the team as well, to allow them to have clarity in what they need to build as they go forward with creating these new features and enhancements. Is that clear? I hope it is. So it's not that different from your Waterfall role. You're still writing requirements. Now it's going to be in a format of a user story. You're still having the conversation with your stakeholders. You're still making sure you do elicitation activities to make sure you're building the right thing. You're still going back and having walkthroughs with your product team or project team to make sure that they approve what it is that you're about to write your stories to build. So the role of your BA is not that different when you're in an Agile environment than when you are in a Waterfall. The only difference is that you don't have to write this big document up front. you can just go just in time and write your user stories as they need them. Okay? The other question is, what is the day-to-day activity of BA in team once sprint planning is done? All right. So once your sprint planning is done, that means the development team can go off and work on the things in the sprint. They have these lists of stories, they have their sprint backlog, and this is what they've committed to building for the next, let's say, 2 weeks of the sprint. What is your role when the sprint planning is done? Well, you're not free. You're not idle. You're not sitting around twiddling your thumbs until next sprint planning. No, you are one, supporting the team. You're a part of the daily scrum in the stand-up. You are there to answer any questions that they may have as they're working through your acceptance criteria. 2, you're prepping for the next sprint. You're talking to the technical team. You're having your elicitation discussions. You're talking to your UX designers. You're talking to your product managers or your project managers. You're understanding what's next that's going to be prioritized, what they need to keep working on. So you're constantly working on keeping that backlog up to date. The stories at the top of the backlog, you're keeping them in the definition of ready. You're making sure that they have all the acceptance criteria. You're making sure you don't miss any requirements, that you've had all the discussion to make sure the acceptance criteria is actually doable and actionable. So you're very busy after sprint planning. You're not sitting around idle at all, right? Because you have to prep for the next sprint. You have to make sure you have discussions ahead of the next sprint planning. And you're doing that documentation, you're doing that elicitation exercise. You are finding out, you're in lockstep with the product owner to make sure that whatever they prioritize, you have the details behind it, okay? So there's no downtime for you. You're always on the go, always preparing for the next sprint and know what that next set of items are and making sure you clarify that and document that properly. The next question he has is, how have you handled scope creep? So how have you handled scope creep? Well, the best way to avoid scope creep is to have an MVP and say, this is what we're going to be building first. And anything else that's different, that's new, that's innovative, that's a great idea, nice to have, that's going to go in our next phase of this release. So one of the first things to do is to get agreement on what is the minimum viable product. What do we need to go to market with at a minimum? So in other words, you're not trying to build a whole car to go to the market. You could just build a skateboard. So one of the ways is to get agreement on what that MVP is. So everything that comes in that's outside of that MVP, you know automatically that's the next release, or that's the next iteration, that's the next version 2, right? That way things don't start creeping in, and then you end up having more time and more testing and more effort and more discussion, and then the project goes over time and over budget, etc. So if you agree on the MVP, you try to get that agreement by pulling the team together, getting the product manager, product owner, UX designer, and say, okay, all of these designs are great, but we can't do all of this in the next 6 months. So we're going to pick this set of features, and everything else is going to put a different design file. We're going to talk about it afterwards. Right now, the very minimum thing that we have to go to market with is these things. Once you can get everybody to agree to that, you cut down on scope creep. The other thing about scope creep that you could try to use to reduce it is start listening out for it before you start documenting it, which means if you're going through a walkthrough, and I have a video on how to avoid scope creep, I think you guys should watch it. I'm going to link it below. If you're going through a walkthrough of a new feature and you start hearing them say words like, it would be nice to have this, or maybe we should add this, you know that that's scope creep coming for you. Right? So start pushing back early, right? Start pushing back early. Well, we really can't add that yet. We have to make sure we finish these things first, right? So as people start looking at the screens and start envisioning a different world or a different way it could work, that's a great way to detect that scope creep is coming. And you can find some other tips that I have in that video as well. But the main way you should try to handle scope creep is try to find out if what they're trying to add right now, if that's really, really urgent and necessary for us to do right now. And some of the ways that you can pacify people is if you say, well, I'm going to create a user story for it. I'm going to add it to our requirements documentation, but I'll have it in the backlog, for example. So I'll wait for the product owner to prioritize it. Or you could say, we have it in a requirements list. So I haven't lost it, and I thank you for the feedback. I've noted it here, and then we'll discuss if it gets into the requirements document. Right? So you kind of have to pacify them. And if you find that you can't escape it, right, it's just happening. Every time you go to your sprint planning, there's new stories added to the sprint scope. And it's keep getting more and more. What you need to start doing is you need to start talking with your Scrum Master. Talk with your product owner and say, well, we're not able to finish what we committed to at the beginning of the sprint because we keep adding in these stories in the middle. And so what we're going to keep having is getting to the sprint timeline is going to be up, and we would have had so many things that were not completed. So that's a good thing to say, for example, in your retrospective, where you can start shining the light on that scope creep is happening and start taking some actions. Maybe you all as a team agree that you're not going to add anything new to the sprint without story pointing it to see how much effort it is. Maybe you agree that, unless it's an urgent production level bug that the clients are all experiencing, you will not add anything new to the sprint. From a requirements perspective, maybe you could say, we have already signed off on the requirements, and this is the limitations of what we're going to build first, and everything else that I get, we're going to create a separate requirements document, and that would be a phase 2, or that would be a version 2. Right? So that's kind of some of the ways you can push back. It's not only up to you to handle scope creep. You want to make sure that if it's coming in from other sources too, that they recognize that it is scope creep, and that they realize that this has a cost. It has a time. There's more time and effort required to think through it. There's more time and effort required to build it. And it just adds to the length of the time that you have to prepare and finish this project or this feature. So that's kind of how you handle scope creep. 1, you try to get a minimum viable product. 2, you try to make sure that the people know that this is introducing scope creep, and you try to find mitigating ways around it. Hopefully that helped you. The other question he has is, what is the biggest challenge you came across in your career, and how did you manage it? That's one I can't answer for you. You have to know what challenges you had and how you came across that, or how did you manage that. Always try to give a story where you end up being the hero or the heroine, where it's because of your creativity, because of your thoughtfulness, because of how analytical you are, that you're able to solve a challenge, and never because somebody else helped you. Okay, so always think of stories where you can be the hero of the story. And then here's another one. He says, you are in a mid of sprint. I think he means the middle of the sprint. And developers mention BA that this task cannot be completed at the end of the sprint due to certain valid reasons. How do you as a BA handle product owner as per him, her bank may pose certain regulations, fines, if not done during the sprint, which may delay in delivering the task? Okay, let me translate. I think what he's saying is you're in the middle of the sprint, and then there is the developers tell you that they can't complete the story, and they have a very good reason why. And it's asking, how do you as a BA handle the product owner if the product owner has made commitment because of certain regulations? Maybe they're working in banking, they have certain regulations and certain fines that they'll encounter if it's not done during the sprint that we had agreed to. So in other words, you've committed to your clients that you're going to get this thing done within that 2-week period of time maybe, and then close to the end of the sprint, the developers say we can't do it. How do you handle it as a PA? Well, he mentioned that the reason is valid. So it's not like the developer didn't want to do it. They may have encountered some technical challenge. They may have encountered some valid reason they can't get it done. Well, the first thing you need to do is you need to try to preempt those things as much as you can. So if you have something in the sprint, you have a user story where you have clients who are committed to it, like they are waiting on it. They have said that if we don't get it within this certain time, we're going to face fines, we're going to be out of compliance, all of these regulatory things. The first thing you need to do as a BA, you need to make sure that that story is at the top of the sprint backlog, right? And it may be the product owner who needs to put it there, whoever, but you need to call attention to it, that this should be at the top, because that should be the first thing that they work on, because there's such a dependency. It's time sensitive and regulation sensitive. And if you don't get it done, you're going to get fines. You don't want to do that to your customers. So that thing should have been at the beginning of the sprint. You shouldn't have it at the end of the sprint to go pick it up. That's the first mistake. So as a BA, you need to make sure you have it at the beginning. And then as you're going through the sprint, check with your Scrum Master and make sure that this thing is being worked on. It's in progress. Somebody picked it up. and call that out in the scrum. So in the daily scrum, this is the purpose of the daily scrum. In the daily scrum, they should be calling out roadblocks. If they had a valid reason why they couldn't do it, that should have been called out sometime before, because if you put it at the top of the sprint and somebody pick it up because it worked from the top, down, then as they're working through it, they would have seen the roadblock, would have understood that this is going to be a challenge, and then the whole team can come together and maybe stop what they're doing and focus on getting that through the gate, right? So there's a lot of preventative things you could do to avoid this. But if in the end you're now at the end of the sprint, a day left for the sprint, and okay, they have a valid reason, the only thing you can do is try to mitigate the backlash of this, because you can't recuperate the time. You don't have enough time to do it. So all you can do, as soon as you know that this is going to be an issue, that they're not going to finish this story, you need to tell your product owner about that, and maybe the scrum master as well. Call attention to it. Make sure that there are people there who can be accountable as well, because it's not just your fault. Make sure everybody who is invested in it is there. Talk to them, and together you guys can come up with some kind of mitigating strategy. Work over the weekend. Purchase some new component that you didn't have before. Whatever you can do to ease the pain on the client, that would be great. And if there's nothing you can do to ease the pain on the client, then you need to bring the client in as well and have the conversation in front of the client to say, what can we do together? Maybe the client could say, well, we do have this extra week buffer time before the regulations kick into play, and so we're going to have to move our people faster and put some of our team members over here to test it when you're done. And maybe there's some things that can be done, but delaying it would be the worst option when you're at this stage, right? So jump on it. It's the most important thing. Call everybody in a meeting. Let's talk about this thing. Let's come up with a solution. And if we can't solve it on our own, we got to go and face the client and take the backlash, because that's all you can do, right? Hopefully that was helpful. So yeah, there you have it. That's the answers I would give to these questions if I were asked those things in the interview. I hope this video was helpful. I hope that when you guys are going up for your interviews and you get questions like these, you're able to answer them. So yeah, just hopefully, you guys can go out there and get the job. I am very, very much rooting for you. If you need personalized help, I have a consult called the Business Analyst Interview Success Blueprint, where I walk you through all the things you need to know to do a business analyst interview successfully. Because I've done so many interviews myself, I understand what people are looking for. I've been the interviewer in many cases as well. And there's only a set number of things that they really need to know from you as a BA, and I know what those things are. And I walk you through the best way to present those things for yourself based on your experience or lack of experience, based on what you've worked on in the past, based on your education, right? So I can tailor it for you. It's a personalized consult. It's geared towards you particularly, and how can you, what are the best things that you can do in your experience and your education to get the job. I also walk you through, how do you do a job analysis? There's a way to do a job analysis for the business analyst job, right? I walk you through what questions to expect and how do you answer those questions. And I walk you through basically the template that you should follow for you to be able to be successful. And I've had lots of success. I have lots of reviews on my website, and I have lots of emails. Sometimes I can't even put the emails out fast enough. I get emails coming back to me so quick. Hey, it worked, Karaleise. I'm so happy I got the job. So yeah, I can help you if you really need the help. But I hope this video was also helpful, and I hope you subscribe, and I hope you like my channel. I hope you like the video as well. And I will see you guys next time. Take care. Bye-bye.